All right, I think at this time we're going to bring up a few chairs and welcome our panelists back up to the stage, as it were. This carpeted area in this region. And then we'll go on to our panel discussion. Okay. Fantastic. Well, yeah, this has been a fun morning to kind of get a perspective on where we could be going, where we maybe should be going, and some of the barriers that lie before us. I guess to kind of get us kicked off, we've said a little bit about it, we've kind of touched on it, but I'm curious to hear each panelist's opinion on what the biggest bottlenecks really are, and what the barriers we are to developing and deploying SMRs for district heating in the next 10 years. I guess we can start maybe with Rowley and work our way down here in just kind of that large open-ended question.
Yeah. Good. Well, for me, actually one of the biggest bottlenecks was the reasons that I wanted to organize the seminar and do the study, was this kind of common perception among people and decision makers that this technology will be available maybe in the 2040s or late 2030s, and that we shouldn't start discussing it because of that. But as we have now learned, it's not the technology availability is probably not the bottleneck, but our kind of capability of have this internal discussion and have the legislation fine-tuned and regulations thought about and stuff like that. So that was the kind of bottleneck that I was hoping to remove with this seminar. I hope I will manage to do that.
Yeah. Just the fact that we wouldn't be talking about it under business as usual considerations. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, I guess for me it kind of boils down under three different factors. First one is the kind of socio-political factor, whether it's socially acceptable, what's the people's acceptance on applying those technologies, which of course will be then reflected on the political landscape and on the regulation side as well. The second one then is the technological feasibility, which I'm eager to learn more about, which I basically don't know enough yet to make a statement. Then the first one is the economic factor, whether the technologies will evolve rapidly enough in order to keep up with the pace of other emerging technologies. When we look at the kind of roadmap that Rowley presented, it shows that this will be somewhere late 2020s or early 2030s. And at the same time, if other technologies keep declining on costs, one of the key issues is that who will be the one to invest first in projects like this. But after those barriers have been tackled and overcome, then I see no other major issues blocking the way.
Yeah, well, just to reply actually to Janne almost there, that of course predicting things is very difficult, especially predicting future is almost impossible. So when we are talking about future costs, future declining costs, who knows? It might be. And of course this nuclear heat is one technological potential, but what I always like to remark about is an example from IEA Energy Technologies Perspectives 2017, where they basically plot all the energy technologies up to 2050. But there is always a remark in each of the segments that, okay, for heating sector, for industrial heat, nuclear power could be a very potential solution or potential source, but since we don't have models for that, we have not included it in our scenarios. So if this possibility is not included, then it's this solution X that you were showing, and we are not actually making purposeful like road towards it or developing. So what's keeping nuclear heat from being a reality? One of the things is that we first need to start talk about it. And when you ask what keeps nuclear district heating within the next 10 years, there might also be the way that this society is arranged at this moment. So we have all these kind of discussions, legal and the steps and so on. So big infrastructure projects just take time. So within next 10 years, it's just the inertia of society. Within next 20 years, it's of course a completely different thing.
That makes sense. Minna?
As a regulator, I will talk from the point of view of licensing SMRs, not from the point of view of deploying SMRs in general. So
I tried to get you on record there. Here's how we need to do it, guys. But yeah, okay.
So, and from the licensing point of view, I would say that the bottleneck at the moment is that we would need a signal from the ministry to start the work to enable licensing of SMRs. So we would need the signal that this is the direction where to go and the resources for doing the work.
Mm-hmm. And so to date, you haven't received that signal?
No.
Okay. What would that signal look like?
It's
That's a good
brown bag full of
question.
cash. With a note, SMRs, do it.
Yeah, for example, it would
Yeah.
be like that, and then some money in our budget. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned you're a bit under-resourced for this challenge right now, which I think there are regulators in other parts of the world that can empathize, and maybe some of them that have partially been able to overcome that in recent years. So hopefully those wins will blow for you as well. Looking over, Raleigh, are you getting baked by the sun? It seems like we got very strong solar energy coming through here. Do you guys want to just scoot, I don't know, 12 inches this way so Raleigh isn't just...
We don't do inches, but we can do half a meter.
Yeah, all right.
Thank
All right,
you.
Good deal. Well, great. So Jana brought up a good point where he sees one of the barriers as far as the financing, economic support for these be like, who's going to move first on this? So maybe we can pull on that thread a little bit. I know Rowley has some ideas about cooperative corporations that have been set up in the past that could potentially work for this. I'm wondering if you have some ideas as well, how we can make this a more attractive investment, district heating with nuclear for these developers. So whoever wants to take a shot at that first, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in Finland we have this cooperative called Mankala company. We are a poor nation, poor in capital, and if we want to build something big, we need to do it together. And this has been traditionally the way that everybody pulls their resources and gets a piece of the pie, sort of. And I think it's kind of very beautiful and Finnish thing to do, and I think it could be applied also to this kind of heat market, at least in some ways. Like I said in my presentation, it will be very hard for small companies to take the responsibility of being a nuclear operator. Maybe they can buy that service or become a part of company like a Mankala company that will take care of that for them, and they just get the heat at cost like they do with the big nuclear plants. So that could be like a distributed Mankala principle thing. You can also have existing companies that already are operating nuclear in Finland, maybe building and taking care of the stuff and just having a long-term like purchasing heat agreement for 20-30 years, so they can kind of justify the risk. So there's many levels you could do this, and for most of the cases, that's, I think, maybe not the only way, but among the best ways to approach especially for the like very small reactors thing.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I think, as Rauli pointed out, probably one of the most obvious ways of starting to think of the financing structure is to see how you could kind of engage the users of, or the kind of redistributors of the heat into the fan. So that would basically mean the utility sector. Then at the stage that we're talking about a new and developing technology, but which has to kind of move its way to the market. Normally, I'm not a very strong proponent of public subsidies and so forth, but kind of coming back from economic theory, this is a prime example of where you could actually utilize public support in order to make something or to speed up the development in order to get something to the market for the first time. That's what we saw, for example, with the wind power in Finland. The subsidies, of course, were quite massive when looking at hindsight, but yesterday or 2 days ago we received the results of the renewable energy auctioning, and when you analyze through them, you can actually see that basically wind power nowadays is economically viable without any or without significant subsidies. So that probably could be a pathway to structuring the nuclear reactors as well.
Yeah, it seems like these types of energy subsidies are really more like investments that pay dividends for society over time. Even the idea of a district heating system in general is kind of on that scale. We pursued it a little differently in the U.S. We decided to instead put furnaces in everybody's house and then run district gas lines and have them generate on their own. Yeah, you bring up a good point there. Vila, I know you touched on in your remarks, you touched a little bit that some of the research you're doing is on identifying those stakeholders. Do you want to say a little bit more about how that process is going on the users, or is that more in the future? Still, I know you had a bullet point on it.
Well, I mean, I think that what we have been doing in Finland during the last year has been quite a lot of work and good work in that direction. Like 1 year ago, I was at Ely-keskus, discussing with some city officials about prospects of SMR with one of Mirna's colleagues. And if you compare what we were telling them at that point, just 1 year ago, compared to the presentations now, there's a huge increase or improvement in the understanding of what's relevant, what's the actual situation, how these end users are going to be, or what are their questions also. And also many energy feed companies have also gained a lot improved understanding on the situation and what actually SMRs are. Year and a half ago, 1 to 2 years ago, many people didn't even know the possibility of using nuclear heat. So this is an ongoing process, and of course understanding could be always improved. I'm quite sure that Professor Juhani Hyvärinen will tell us that we are wrong, and he has good ideas, which is of course the truth. So we keep on we keep on building the common understanding all the time with this kind of discussion. So it's an ongoing process, and we have made good inroads, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, great. I'm glad the ball's getting rolling there. I had a question for Min. I think this will be one of my last, as with my moderator privilege, before we open it up to you folks. But so, just kind of curious. what you'll say to this. This is my favorite question to ask nuclear regulators. And it's always on. It can be argued, and I think the first person I heard argue this was Rowley, that the most dangerous nuclear power plant is the one that doesn't get built, because because what you build instead, which has demonstrable public health impacts from pollution and climate change. So my question for you is, how does that or does that calculation come into play, where you weigh the safety of the reactor against maybe the safety of what would be built instead of that reactor?
No, that is not our task. It's
Right.
the task of political discussion, and our part starts when there has been a political decision to build nuclear facilities, and then we just evaluate that whether they are safe, whether they fulfill the requirements. Of course, when we write our requirements, that kind of considerations are back in our mind, of course, too. But we don't do energy policy, and the choice of the different ways to produce energy, they are not our business.
Just to comment on that, obviously you're the radiation safety regulator and authority, and you don't have the mandate to look at the kind of whole social benefit from all the angles. But what that I think has led to has been that we only talk about nuclear safety. And that gives people the impression that nuclear is dangerous because we talk all the time about the safety of nuclear. We don't talk about the safety of a coal plant or a gas plant or biomass plant or whatever a kind of other source. So there is no kind of this wider perspective also for the public. So they think that nuclear must be dangerous because they're always talking about just only the nuclear safety and none of the other stuff. So I think that this is actually something that I'm personally trying to get more into the discussion with these kinds of somewhat provocative statements that the most dangerous nuclear power plant is the one that gets shut down prematurely or is not built. Because if you build a nuclear power plant in the Western world, you will have to follow the regulations. And it's going to be, if you do that, it's going to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there is also the consideration that coal plants are allowed to emit radiation on far greater amounts than nuclear plants are right out their smokestacks. In the U.S., they're characterized as NORM, which stands for naturally occurring radioactive material, which is no different than, or would have no different health impacts than any kind of radiation coming out of a nuclear power plant. But because the fossil lobbies may be much better at their jobs than the nuclear lobby, they can get away with it. Great. So I think at this point, I'm sure there are some questions out in the audience. A couple right in the front row. You, sir.
Okay, thank you. Businesses have these boards who will look at how you expend the money, and then they cannot make these decisions to invest in nuclear plants if they are very risky. But private citizens don't have. So is it possible for me personally and other people who are interested in nuclear power to just give them money for these purposes?
I have an account number for you later.
Do you mind sharing your name and just identifying yourself for everybody
Yes,
here?
I'm Janne Hirvonen from Aalto University. I research solar power actually.
Cool.
So
All right.
that's my specialty.
Great. Yeah. So how can your just common man help support this effort?
Buy stocks of Fortum. I mean, that's like, I guess, the simplest.
Yeah.
It doesn't give money to Fortum.
Yeah, but it
invest.
increases their price a bit. So it increases the value of the corporation. which gives it leverage. Whatever. I've been thinking about that same thing because I'm like, okay, I'm doing all these things, but can I get more involved somehow? Can I start a savings account for saving the world with nuclear power? And currently there is no such thing, so maybe we have to meet up and do some innovative thinking on this. I mean, the Mankala principle in one way is this kind of thing, but because it's owned by many of the Mankala companies are owned by municipal energy companies that are owned by the municipality. So the people living in that. So actually you are having a share in that, but it's very passive and you don't get to do anything. So I think that's like the problem.
And it's a majority decision. Like if I'm the minority, I can't affect it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me continue from there. Juhani Hyvärinen from Lappeenranta University of Technology, and in my previous life I have been involved with a new build project where there was a lot of public interest in contributing private money. And actually there was some thinking of how that could be done in a Mankala company, so that there should be a company in which you can invest or buy shares, which would then be a shareholder, one of the many shareholders of the Mankala company. So in principle this could be done under the Mankala structure, but it takes some paperwork to be done. But my main comment that I was going to make was to our friend the regulator here. Thank you very much for your presentation. I thought that it was very open-minded to the ideas that would be needed for deployment of SMRs, and as you already pointed out, it's in principle possible to start developing SMRs in Finland today if we want to. We just have to do it under the present legislation, but if there is some creative interpretation of that legislation by the ministry and by you, then we could move much faster than Rauli was foreseeing.
That was the business as usual, where we are not innovative.
For all the process that all the time that it takes to change the law massively and so on, it will take too long. So that's one thing. But then another thing. I think an important thing about this developing the regulations for the SMRs should be done mainly by the industry. In understand cooperation with you, but the main work actually should not be done by the regulatory authority in their ivory tower, or pardon me the expression, in the nice white building that you have. But it should be mainly done by the industry, who would be then implementing these things and who are best aware of what can be done to reduce the risks. And as you were pointing out, the ultimate goal is to protect the people. So if we can demonstrate that we reach for the SMR or for a very small reactor, if we reach similar or better safety performance, lower doses, lower exposure to the population, then we are done. And this will take some creative thinking from the developers of this technology, not just from the regulator themselves. So this has to happen together in order to reach an optimum solution.
Any reactions to that?
It's quite thorough.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you for your comment. But before we take the next question, I just want to check if people can hear in the back. If you're having trouble hearing in the back, would you raise your hand? Good back there? Okay, great. All right. Cannon Bryant, terrestrial energy. I already took that part from you. Go ahead, Cannon.
This is not a question. I'm actually would like to respond to the young man in the front row here. So I'm skipping the panel a little bit, so I apologize. But so I'm a financial officer. So if you're going to ask anybody that question, it'd probably be me. If you want to invest in nuclear technology, there are development companies that are pursuing that, and in some cases you could make investments in those companies. It's not that easy to do because they're all private, but I think a better way to help would be to invest in nuclear advocacy. So there are a number of nuclear advocacy organizations. One of them is called Generation Atomic. It's led by Eric Meyer, who's sitting right there. And It sounds like a joke, but actually it's really important to invest in nuclear advocacy. It lowers the political risk, which is very helpful for the deployment of these new technologies. So I would encourage you and everybody in this room to go and visit Generation Atomic website and please make a charitable donation. It finances the important work that Eric does. He's probably one of the best advocates in this industry that I've ever seen. Rally's pretty good too. So this is one way in which you can use your private capital to invest, which will really have a meaningful impact on the deployment of these technologies.
Well, thanks, Gannon. That's really nice. I did not put him up to that, if anybody is wondering. Yeah. You, sir.
Yeah. I'm terve ystävät. I'm from Virost, from Estonia. Kalev Kallemets, Fermi Energy. You are missing something here, Rauli.
I am.
That is really important. Why we are doing this nuclear startup in Estonia, looking at SMRs, is the very simple question: what is the alternative? And it is important in our context of not replacing existing capacities, but understanding that, and this is the situation clearly in Helsinki, that you have coal phase out, and you need to build new capacities. And I learned only a few weeks ago also in Estonia that I didn't know that actually the lifetime of biomass facilities is not limited in a sense that the building would collapse, but in a sense that the furnace wear down is much faster even than with coal-fired power stations or heat stations. And when you're talking about Poland, there also the real business question is there that the majority of those capacities have been built in 70s, 80s, which is leading to us to a similar situation that we have with the power generation in Estonia, that we are shutting down capacities this year, 600 megawatts, and coming 5-10 years, additional 800 megawatts of power capacity, which we have to find an alternative. And the alternative also for Poles, and actually for you, is whether to keep burning stuff or do something else. And for the Poles, it's quite simple. You can't do coal new furnaces. You can't do, because it's uninvestable. Because of their lifetime and lifetime emissions, and looking at climate policy and so forth, it's uninvestable. And number two, going to gas has its own issues, for Poles especially. So for Poland in the heat generation, it has its own issues because not all Polish towns are next to a coast. So the cooling is an issue, which is much better in Finland, where majority of the cities are next to a massive lake or a sea. So and in Tallinn as well, where I think we have some sites that are pretty good for heat generation from nuclear. So you should make a business case and look at the feasibility from the business perspective. If the heat production cost is 20, that's big. That's really attractive business case, and you should go for it.
Thank you for those. Those were actually things that I thought about when I was planning on what to include and not include in the study. So one option would have been to kind of take all the major cities in Finland and each power plant that they have, and when was it built and when it will likely be decommissioned. So you could think about this kind of when it needs to be replaced. Then I thought that, okay, maybe it's not in the scope of this study, or maybe in the scope of some future work. And I also wanted to kind of make this as neutral in this sense that I don't want to point at any one corporation or city or utility that you need to go nuclear now. Your facility needs to be renewed by this day and you need to get a reactor. That's their choice. But I wanted to try to give them the tools to think about this option as well and make the business case.
You're making a case actually, if you propose this idea, that the alternative is they need to invest in a new facility and having, from a current perspective, where they have actually capitalized all the previous costs, to have a higher cost heat. Understand? If you're doing a initial investment, you need to have higher cost heat relative to nuclear, which would operate for a longer period of time. And yes, there are disadvantages, but I mean, it would be a profitable proposition both for the company involved and for the citizens involved.
Yeah. I just thought that it's not my kind of role with this study to do this work. Somebody needs to pay me more.
I'm kind of interested if Janne has some perspective on if the cost of ETS, the coming increasing cost of emissions trading schemes, play into investment decisions on what kind of energy we're putting on the grid now and for heating as well.
I guess the kind of ETS price estimates up to 10, 15, 20 years into the future, there are one key fundamental factor what energy companies are looking at when they consider their investment calculations. I think we have energy companies here who could address this in more specific, but that does play a key role. And then all the price projections, they seem to go upwards in the future, which is basically what EU climate policy is supposed to do. We're supposed to make emissions more expensive, and that's something that will have an impact on the investment decision, of course. But whether that's big enough for supporting companies to take on risks of new technologies, that probably remains to be seen.
Good point. Yes, sir.
Hi, so I'm Juha Poikola from TVO, and just one comment to this financial issue is maybe the money is not that important from individual states. I would prefer to use the political pressure to get these things move forward. Like in Olkiluoto 3, there are 132 municipalities putting their money already. Like Helsinki is putting 10% of the investment. And it's a political decision. So we have the politicians here, so they have a major role, also in the municipality and the national level. And the second comment is considering this SMR, the letter M, which is the modular, and in this case I refer it also to Minna, the letter M. And, we have this history of building this first-of-a-kind nuclear power plants in Europe, and it has been not a very successful story. So the biggest issue is that we cannot repeat this kind of a first-of-a-kind system in Europe, that we will have different regulation in different EU member countries. And the STUK has is a very highly evaluated regulator, so it can have a big role in licensing process and having a European licensing around SMR. So it's a time now to have this kind of a common licensing process, like for example we have in air industry. That's the bottleneck I would see in the coming years.
More questions? You, sir.
Yes. Riku Merikoski, Fortum, but I would like to actually pose this question as a private person and as a voter. So, how much money would STUK actually need to be licensing ready? I mean, an order of magnitude, is it 10 million or 100 million? Because that's actually what the politicians need to know after the election. How much money does this need to make you ready for the licensing of this kind of new things? And just as a comment of this private investing in nuclear, I think just someone needs to just bring up this like Lumi-ydinvoima project. I mean, in a way, we have this Lumi-tuuli which has its own wind power. Somebody has to bring up a company and then buy shares of an existing project. I think that's completely possible. there might be even some who could sell from an existing project. I have heard.
Do you have an answer for that?
No, I don't have an
Have a big bag?
exact figure to give, and sorry, I don't have the
Yeah.
exact number.
I
how
have an
much
answer
money
for
would
that, though.
be needed, but I could also point out that earlier I said that we would need the signal from the ministry to start doing that work, and it's not that we have not discussed this at all with the ministry yet. We have discussed it with them, and the ministry is planning maybe.
I hope the minister gets here.
Yeah, so we are planning this renewal of the nuclear energy related legislation in the coming years, and of course that would be the chance to then take into account SMRs also. So maybe I gave a little bit too pessimistic view of the situation, so we have some discussions already.
So, sorry, short. So signal first, money then.
Yeah.
I can bring a proxy for that answer. Is that I know that in the UK the government has given £7 million, so about 10 million euros, for the regulator to get the capabilities to regulate advanced nuclear reactors. So I would say that I'm not sure if that's like the whole thing here, but it's also a powerful signal from the government to the industry that we are taking this seriously. So well, that's a number among others.
Would initiatives to harmonize regulations across a wider area end up saving you money and making it easier, or would it be actually more than to engage with those multiple stakeholders?
I think at least in the beginning we would need more for that. Then of course in a later phase, if there was a harmonization of regulations and requirements, then after that of course licensing would be easier.
Yeah, hi, Atte Harren from the Green Party. I was wondering, one aspect I don't think was touched upon yet so much is that we have in Finland a very strict regulation that any nuclear waste produced here must be also stored here or handled here. And I suppose similar legislations are in place in many other European countries and so on. I would guess that thinking about the business models for the smallest reactors, this might be a bit of a challenge. So is this a bottleneck for the business also? Could it help if we could just make an international business out of waste management as well? And maybe this is a question for you three guys, and maybe for Minna, what type of safety regulation would this type of activity need?
Okay, talk about politically hot question there. I think you both touched the internal, like Finnish situation, and external, of course. Of course, SMRs for heat use, they would be smaller than our current current nuclear power plants. So with current nuclear power plants, it's the license holder who's responsible for the waste. On the other hand, there are radioactive waste being produced in Finland. For instance, we VTT have a research reactor that's being decommissioned, and I'm not party to these discussions, but I've understood that there's a agreement deal to actually on commercial level to maybe start dealing with this. So if there was some smaller heat user, they would of course need to handle the waste somehow. There are currently actors in Finland like Posiva who are doing the final disposal. TVO Stuk are doing their own facilities. So of course one question is that if they can somehow come to an agreement. So this this is of course part of the initial surveys that needs to be done. if some new actor wants to start, especially like smaller reactor, that what's the actual way to do this? Juha Poikala there is very intently looking at me. Or was, I hope that answer was a correct one. Okay, but
Great. Would anybody else care to comment?
Yes, if I can comment,
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
Harri Tuomisto from Fortum. This is quite much linked to the nuclear operators, because when you are looking for the business model, we have examples in Finland how much it will cost to build a new nuclear operator. This is a question of hundreds of millions of euros that you can build a new nuclear operator. So the business model probably would be, in any case, that one of the existing nuclear operators would be the operator and taking care of the business and selling the heat to the end users. No, not necessarily directly, they can use. The end users can be municipal energy companies and whatever. So then the waste question is solved in the same way. If the nuclear operators are needed for the operation of these facilities, nuclear operators already have arrangements for the spent fuel and for the other radioactive waste.
Makes sense. Looking to rally for Qth. Perhaps it's a good time to bring up our guest from the ministry.
I'll be waiting for you.
Great. So we'll let the panel go. Let's give the panel a round